Tarek woke up in darkness. His body felt heavy and strange, as though something inside him was pulling him down. The ache in his chest was deep and raw, unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Slowly his senses began to return. The sterile hum of the medical bay filled his ears. His skin prickled under the cold light that glared down at him from above. There it was. The sound. A rhythmic thump. Steady, loud, alien. It was like an anchor holding him in place. He couldn't tell if the sound was coming from outside or inside of him. Slowly he pressed a hand to his chest. Beneath his palm he felt it. The beat. It wasn't like his own heart's had been. The synchronized hum of his Arcasan physiology was gone, replaced by this crude, irregular rhythm. He tried to sit up, but pain lanced through his chest. His breathing hitched as he fell back onto the hard surface of the med bed. His throat felt dry. His voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. "Is it done?" A shadow moved into view. Dr. Kevar stared down at him. Her sharp, angular face was expressionless as always. "Yes, Tarek. The transplant was successful. The human heart is functioning as expected." Tarek swallowed hard, trying to ignore the nausea rising in his stomach. He wanted to move, to feel normal again, but every inch of him felt wrong. Foreign. "It feels different," he said, struggling to make sense of the sensations rippling through his body. "It will," Kevar said, her tone clinical and detached. "Your body is adjusting to the new organ. It will take time. The human heart does not function like ours. It is reactive. It is emotional." Tarek frowned. The ache in his chest seemed to grow heavier with every word she said. Emotional? What does that even mean? Kevar's expression didn't change. Human hearts respond to more than physical stimuli. Their biology is closely tied to their emotions. You may experience irregularities. Irregularities? Tarek repeated. His voice was sharper now, his frustration rising. What kind of irregularities? Vivid dreams, Kevar replied in her usual matter-of-fact tone. Memories that may not belong to you. Emotional instability. In rare cases, recipients have reported hallucinations tied to the donor's life. Tarek stared at her. The weight of her words sank into him like stones. Memories that may not belong to him. Hallucinations? His chest tightened as the steady rhythm of the heart filled his ears again. It was too loud, too alive. "I need rest," he muttered. He closed his eyes, hoping the silence would drown out the noise. But it didn't. The beat was relentless. And then there she was. She appeared in his mind like a dream. Her face was soft and human. Her eyes were warm and kind, like she could see every hidden part of him. Her hair fell in gentle waves, framing her face. She smiled faintly, her lips moving as though she wanted to speak, but her voice didn't reach him. Her presence wasn't just vivid. It was alive. He could feel her warmth, her energy, her light. It was overwhelming. "Tarek," she whispered, her voice finally breaking through the fog in his mind. It was soft and gentle, like a breeze brushing against his skin. "You're not alone." Her words echoed around him as the vision faded, leaving only darkness. His eyes snapped open. He was back in the medical bay. The hum of the monitors filled the silence. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest. The beat of the human heart was steady and unyielding. Her heart. "No," he whispered to himself. His voice was barely audible. "It's just a side effect. That's all." But the image of her lingered in his mind. Her voice, her smile, her eyes. They wouldn't leave him. Night after night, the visions returned. They started in his dreams, pulling him into places he didn't recognize. He stood in fields bathed in golden sunlight. He walked through rooms filled with laughter and warmth. She was always there, watching, smiling, waiting. At first he thought it would stop, that it was just his body adjusting. But the visions grew stronger. They began to creep into his waking hours. He would see her reflection in polished surfaces, hear her laughter when no one else was around, feel her emotions as if they were his own. Joy, pain, fear. They hit him like waves crashing against the shore. Unstoppable. Unrelenting. He pressed his hand to his chest again, feeling the steady beat of her heart. It was no longer just an organ keeping him alive. It was something more, something he couldn't explain. "Who are you?" he whispered to the empty room. She didn't answer, but her presence was there, a quiet pull that refused to let him go. Tarek spent hours in the medical archives searching for answers. He combed through every detail of the transplant records, hoping to find something that would make sense of what was happening to him. The human heart wasn't just keeping him alive, it was tethering him to someone he had never met. Someone who felt more real than anything he had ever known. The name was simple: Alina Carter. A miner from a small colony on the edge of the galaxy. She had died in an accident. Her body had been donated to the Interstellar Organ Registry. On the surface, there was nothing remarkable about her. But to Tarek, she was everything. The visions grew stronger the more he uncovered. Her face became clearer, her voice louder. She wasn't just a memory. She was alive in a way he couldn't understand. He found sketches she had drawn scattered through her medical file. Simple things: flowers, stars, her own hand resting on a table. They were beautiful in their simplicity. Then he found the note. It was written by her partner. A short message tucked into her records. Alina always said her heart was too full for one life. I hope it finds someone who needs it. Tarek stared at the words, his chest tightening. He didn't know why, but they felt like they were meant for him. Like she had left them there just for him. The pull became unbearable. Every beat of the heart in his chest demanded action. Her voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. Find me. He didn't understand why. He didn't know what he would find. But he couldn't ignore her. He couldn't ignore the pull. The journey to Alina's colony felt like an eternity. Tarek sat alone in the cockpit of his ship, the quiet hum of the engines failing to calm the storm in his mind. His chest ached, not from the transplant but from something deeper. The steady thump of the human heart filled the silence, louder and more present than the gentle rhythm of his Arcasan physiology ever had been. It wasn't just keeping him alive, it was demanding something from him. He stared out at the vastness of space, his reflection faint in the viewport. For the first time in his life, he felt unmoored, lost. He had always been sure of his path, every decision grounded in reason and logic. But now he was chasing a shadow, a voice, a feeling he couldn't explain. The face of the woman from his visions lingered in his mind. Her eyes, her smile, the warmth of her presence. Why me? He murmured to the empty cockpit. The human heart beat steadily in his chest, its rhythm unrelenting. It offered no answers, only the same pull that had driven him this far. When his ship finally descended onto the colony, the sight surprised him. It wasn't what he had expected. The settlement was small, its buildings simple and functional, surrounded by endless stretches of rugged terrain. It was a quiet place, the kind of place where life was measured in hard work and small joys. He felt out of place the moment he stepped off his ship, his Arcasan frame towering over the humans who moved about their day. The colonists regarded him with wary curiosity. Arcasans didn't come to places like this. They had no reason to. He approached a small group, their faces lined with years of labor under the harsh sun. I'm looking for someone, he said, his voice steady despite the unease tightening his chest. Alina Carter. The name softened their expressions. A woman stepped forward, her gaze tinged with sadness. Alina, she's gone. She was one of us. A miner, an artist. She died months ago. Tarek nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. I know. I have her heart. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't look alarmed. Instead, she smiled faintly, her gaze growing distant. She always did say her heart was too big for one life. She'd be happy to know it's still beating. They led him to her home. It was a small, modest structure at the edge of the settlement, surrounded by wildflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. The moment he stepped inside, he felt her presence. It was in everything, the sketches pinned to the walls, the worn furniture, the faint scent of paint lingering in the air. Her life was etched into every corner of the space. And for a moment, it was overwhelming. He moved slowly, his hand brushing against the edge of a table where a set of colored pencils lay scattered. There were drawings pinned to the walls, simple but full of life. Stars, flowers, hands, faces. Each one seemed to hum with the same energy he felt in her heart. She had a way of making you feel seen, one of the colonists said quietly, even when you didn't think anyone was looking. Tarek closed his eyes, his hand resting over his chest. The steady beat of her heart filled his ears. The visions returned, clearer than ever. He saw her sitting at the table, her hair falling over her shoulder as she sketched. She looked up at him, her smile warm and familiar. You found me, she said softly. When he opened his eyes, The room was empty, but her presence lingered like an echo. Tarek stayed in the colony longer than he had planned. The pull of her heart kept him there, urging him to learn more about her. He spoke with her friends, her neighbors, the people who had known her best. They painted a picture of a woman full of life and kindness. She had been a miner, yes, but also an artist, a dreamer, someone who saw beauty in the smallest details. She loved deeply, one of them said, their voice tinged with sadness. She gave everything she had to the people around her. She always said her heart was too full for one person. Tarek listened, his chest aching with every word. He spent hours in her home, surrounded by the remnants of her life, her drawings, her books, the letters she had written but never sent. He felt like an intruder at first, but the more time he spent there, the more he felt connected to her. Like he was piecing together a puzzle he hadn't known he needed to solve. One evening, as the sun set over the rugged horizon, he sat at her table, her sketches spread out before him. The steady beat of her heart filled the silence, its rhythm calming and steady. He closed his eyes, letting himself feel the pull he had been resisting for so long, and then she was there. Her presence wasn't a vision this time. It wasn't a dream. It was something deeper. He could feel her warmth, her energy, her light. She stood before him, her eyes soft, her smile gentle. "Thank you," she said, her voice filling the room, "for keeping me alive." Tarek's breath hitched, his chest tightening. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Her smile widened, faint but genuine. "Because you needed me," she said simply. "And because I needed you." The words hit him like a wave, and for the first time since the transplant, the ache in his chest eased. The connection between them wasn't just a side effect or a coincidence. It was something more, something he couldn't explain but didn't need to. When he opened his eyes, the room was quiet again, but her presence lingered. He placed his hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat of her heart. It was no longer just an organ keeping him alive. It was her, and for the first time, he didn't feel alone. Tarek stood outside Alina's small home, watching the colony slowly come alive in the soft light of dawn. The settlement was quiet, its people moving with purpose but without urgency. It was a stark contrast to the noise in his head, the endless thrum of questions and emotions he couldn't quite understand. The human heart in his chest beat steadily, but it wasn't just his anymore. It hadn't been since the transplant. It was hers, and it carried pieces of her he hadn't asked for but couldn't seem to live without. He walked through the settlement aimlessly, his mind replaying every vision, every word from the colonists who had known her. They spoke of her laughter, the way she had been able to brighten even the darkest days. They talked about how she had worked harder than anyone else, but still found time to create, to draw, to bring beauty into a place that didn't always feel like it deserved it. She made this place feel alive. Someone had told him the night before. Now it just feels empty. Tarek's hand drifted to his chest, his fingers brushing against the fabric of his jacket. The heart thumped beneath, its rhythm steady and unyielding. But the ache hadn't gone away. It was as though her presence was tethered to him, refusing to leave until he understood something he couldn't quite grasp. He found himself wandering to the outskirts of the settlement, where the rugged terrain stretched out endlessly. The landscape was harsh, but the wildflowers that grew in defiance of it all reminded him of her. She had been like that, hadn't she? Beautiful, resilient, unstoppable. "Why me?" he whispered again, the question falling into the silence around him. He half expected her voice to answer, to echo in his mind like it had so many times before. But this time there was only the wind, gentle and indifferent. For the first time, Tarek wondered if he was asking the wrong question. That night, the visions returned with a force that left him shaken. He dreamed of Alina, but it wasn't like before. It wasn't fragments or glimpses. It was her, entirely her. She stood in the middle of a sunlit field, her hair catching the golden light like it was woven from the rays themselves. She smiled when she saw him, and for the first time, it felt like she wasn't just a memory. She was real, present. "Tarek," she said, her voice carrying across the open space like it was meant only for him. "You're running." He frowned, his heart racing. "I'm not running. I'm here. I came to find you. She shook her head gently, her smile soft but sad. You came here looking for answers, but you're not ready to listen to them. The word stung, though he didn't fully understand why. I don't know what you want from me, he admitted, his voice breaking slightly. I don't know why I'm here. You're here because you feel it, she said, stepping closer. Her eyes searched his, their warmth cutting through the confusion in his mind. Because my heart is yours now, and it's trying to tell you something. He stared at her, his mind racing. What? She reached out, her fingers brushing against his chest. The touch was light but grounding, her presence anchoring him in a way that felt almost tangible. It's not about why you have my heart, she said softly. It's about what you're going to do with it. The vision faded before he could respond, and when he woke, his hand was pressed over his chest. The human heart beat steadily beneath his palm, its rhythm impossibly loud in the quiet of the night. The next morning, Tarek stood in the center of the settlement, surrounded by the people who had known her best, her partner, her friends, the neighbors who had seen her grow, live, and love. He didn't belong here, but he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. Either. Not entirely. He cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Alina's heart, he began, his hand brushing against his chest. It saved my life. But it's more than that. It's connected to me, to her. I feel her. I see her. She's still here, with me, the crowd murmured, their expressions a mix of sadness and awe. Her partner stepped forward, their eyes bright with unshed tears. She always said she wanted to keep giving, even when she was gone. She'd be happy to know she's still making a difference. Tarek nodded, his throat tightening. She is. But it's not just my life she saved. It's something bigger. She left a part of herself behind, and I can feel it. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I know I can't ignore it. The partner smiled faintly, their gaze soft. You don't have to know yet. She would have said that life isn't about having all the answers. It's about what you choose to do with the questions. Tarek felt the weight of the words settle over him, heavy but not unwelcome. For the first time, the ache in his chest didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. That night, as he prepared to leave the colony, he stood outside her home one last time. The stars stretched out above him, endless and silent. He placed a hand over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart. Thank you, he said softly, his voice breaking in the quiet. For everything. And for the first time, he didn't need to hear her voice to feel her answer. She was there, always. And as he stepped onto his ship and set his course for the unknown, he carried her with him, not just in the heart that beat in his chest, but in every choice he made from that moment forward. Tarek's ship drifted silently through the void, the lights of the colony fading into the distance. He sat in the cockpit, his hand resting over his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of Alina's heart. It no longer felt foreign. It no longer felt like it didn't belong. It was his now, but it was hers too. Somehow, it was both. The stars stretched endlessly before him. But for the first time, Tarek didn't feel adrift. He wasn't sure where he was going, but the pull in his chest was steady. A heartbeat that wasn't just keeping him alive, it was driving him forward. The vision came again, unbidden but welcome. Alina stood before him, her presence vivid and grounding. She wasn't just a memory. She wasn't a ghost. She was alive in a way he couldn't explain. You found me, she said, her voice soft. Tarek leaned back in his seat, his eyes closing. I don't know what to do now, he admitted. You said it wasn't about why I have your heart, that it's about what I do with it, but I don't know what that means. Her smile was patient, understanding. You don't need to know yet. Life isn't about certainty, Tarek. It's about choice. Every beat of your heart is a chance to live, to choose. You've already started. He hesitated, his chest tightening. What if I make the wrong choices? What if I waste this? Her laugh was light, wrapping around him like sunlight. You won't. Because you care enough to ask. That's all that matters. He wanted to hold on to the moment, but she was already fading, her light dimming. Will I see you again? He asked, his voice quiet. Her smile stayed, unwavering. I'm always with you. and then she was gone. Tarek opened his eyes. The ache in his chest remained. But it wasn't loss. It was purpose. Every beat of her heart carried him forward. He turned to the controls, his hand steady as he set a course into uncharted space. He didn't know where he was going. But he didn't need to. The heart in his chest was a rhythm, a promise. This was his second chance. As the engines roared to life and the stars blurred into streaks of light, Tarek leaned back, his hand still over his chest. The steady thump guided him forward. It wasn't just hers or his anymore. It was theirs. And for the first time, Tarek felt whole.